Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.19 Toplane Tierlist. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. This patch was a huge one. There are so many things shifting and moving around. There are some key things which I am going to point out at the beginning of this tier list. I've also cut down the amount of champions. If a champion is very unpopular, it's very hard to gauge just how strong they are with the amount of moving parts, which is why some of them I haven't added on instantly. Things like Rammus, for example, not on the tier list at the moment. The main takeaways of this patch are Stridebreaker is substantially weaker. This has actually warped a lot of champions' power. Tank items were some of the items hit the least, so we're going to see a lot more tanks rise up in prevalence, and as a consequence of that, I guess you could say, we see anti-tanks also becoming a lot stronger. Riftmaker staying relatively strong combined with some of the other AP health options staying relatively similar in power level, has also opened up quite a bit in that space. Bruiser items are some of the biggest losers this patch: the Cleavers, the Eclipses, the Sundered Skies, the Sterxes. Trinity, it looks to be pretty unscathed, so there's a lot of Trinity champions doing a bit better at the moment. And then two direct changes, obviously we saw Vladimir have his W healing reduced against minions. This has basically killed the Grasp W max Vladimir variation, even though it was already underperforming as it was a more situationally viable thing. And Cassante looks to be pretty terrible at the moment. You might have seen clips circulating online about his W damage and how in All Out it acts almost like set W. This obviously creates like a very misconceived idea of how strong the champion actually is. If you miss this ability or use it incorrectly, obviously you are locked to a direction now rather than what it used to be where you could like choose the direction in mid cast. Then it really prohibits the amount of power he can really have in a team fight, and the champion's just in a really bad spot at the moment, so I'd really recommend avoiding him. But let's get into the tier list. So the D tier is going to consist of relatively similar champions to 14.18 actually. Cassante, still a very weak pick, but I'm honestly surprised they reworked him. I think he was in a relatively fine spot, obviously still pretty dominant and competitive, but even at like a 45% win rate in solo queue, he still felt very approachable for a lot of people. That combined with the fact that the kit was still smooth, not as smooth as it has been. Obviously they've done a lot to try and take that power away, as that was one of his like competitive levers, but now his kit's very clunky. It's very much reliant on hitting certain like abilities to really function, and overall, yeah, the champion's in a pretty rough spot at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if Riot do a hotfix and try and shift some stuff around, but if they don't be surprised. He might be buffed in 14.20. Smolder still underperforms in the top lane. They obviously nerfed him for solo lane power in the previous patch to 14.18 because of his concern of competitive dominance. Vladimir in a really bad spot at the moment with the Grasp W max build. If you go like the phase rush of a Summonary, a standard Q max AP variation, then he looks to be about a low B, high C tier option. Still looks to be kind of underperforming at the moment though. Vayne, we see Grasp Vayne as something which has popped up not only in competitive on the 14.18 patch, but a bit in solo queue, and it seems to be finding some level of success. It's doing a bit better than Fleet, which has obviously been pretty heavily nerfed for ranged champions. On top of also doing better than PTA, and Lethal Tempo looks to be pretty weak at the moment, so I wouldn't be surprised if that also gets buffed in 14.20. Overall, look towards Grasp. It looks to be the best way to play her, but if anything, I wouldn't really recommend playing her, even though she can kind of be a solid answer to some of the more prevalent picks at the moment. Yasuo underperforming on Lethal Tempo, kind of akin to a lot of the champions. It just doesn't look to be the best in the slot on many picks at the moment, outside of maybe like Cogmore. So Yasuo also going to move in my D tier. Moving on to my C tier. So Rumble jumps out of the D tier into the C tier. He's doing a bit better. The items which he uses weren't nerfed as hard as some of the other items. Thus, he gets to go up. I can't find him. There we go, found him. Pantheon took a big hit this patch. He drops from a B tier to a C tier option. Overall, Pantheon was already on the decline, but he was one of the champions hit quite heavily with the item system. Also, Riven as well. Both these champions tend to share from the same pool of items as each other, and both their items were nerfed quite aggressively. I imagine these champions will get buffed relatively soon. Aurelia also tends to lean towards some of the same items. Obviously, Bork looks to be a bit weak. I mean, lost 10 AD, which was, for some champions, not as bad, because some of them use it for primarily the on-hit and the attack speed lifesteal. Aurelia could utilize the AD and was using it to, obviously, clear waves more effectively, and losing that has definitely hurt her a bit more than some of the other item users. Yone, Looking back towards Fleet over Grasp, Grasp tends to be paired with Stridebreaker, and Stridebreaker looks to be one of the biggest losers of the item system, which is why he is now towards the low end of the C tier. Jace stays relatively neutral. He didn't really gain / lose power. Obviously, Eclipse was an item which took a bit of a bigger swing, but he obviously gains back some of that through some of either the lethality options or Mana Mune. Overall, he stays in a relatively neutral position. Darius, victim of Stridebreaker. Olaf, also victim of Stridebreaker. Olaf was already within my C tier. He was about to jump up out of the C tier into the B tier. He is obviously very reliant on being a counter pick. Darius tends to be a bit more elite skewed, and also a bit counterpick reliant, but not anywhere near as egregiously as the likes of Olaf, who is very good into certain matchups, but then can't really utilize the power of his ultimate as much into other ones. Tryndamere, also, once again, a victim of, well, I mean, he was more of a victim of the crit system being quite aggressively nerfed. Less movement speed here hurts Tryndamere quite a bit, as he is very reliant on his movement speed to stick to people and then utilize his damage in those aspects. So Tryndamere also going to be within my C tier now. I mean, it's like Flicker Blades and Phantom Dancer both lost quite a substantial amount of movement speed on those items. Quinn lost a decent amount through Profane Hydra being quite aggressively nerfed. That was also one of the items which took a bit more of a hit. I'm pretty sure Ravenous also did lose a decent chunk of power, which is why Tryndamere also drops down a bit more. Aurora probably is like an A tier, maybe even S tier elite skewed pick. The problem is this champion's really hard to gauge on just how powerful it is, because the difference between the people who put a lot of time into this pick and the people who are like, on like the more general player base is really big at the moment. So this champion's probably close to overpowered, but because people are not putting the games in to really find like her ceiling at the moment and like learn all the mechanics of this champion, like she has a lot which can be like quite hard to really wrap your head around in the situations, then yeah, she can definitely rise up the tier list, but for the moment I'm gonna have her in the C tier. She's not like the other C tier champions though. I do believe if you put a lot of time into her, you can definitely be more rewarded than some of the other picks here. Moving on to the B tier, so Kali goes back up. She didn't get hit as hard as some of the other champions, so she's made a couple of jumps. Gangplank. So Gangplank is probably overpowered at the moment. I mean, I'm interested to see this space, because when people catch on to just how strong this champion is in elite and competitive, whether like it's a bit more different for competitive, obviously, because we're not going to have competitive games on any of the splits changes. We're going to have them on the next splits changes, and they are supposed to be huge, so the game might just be completely warped again. But Gangplank at the moment probably overpowered in elite play. For the average Soda Cube, he's playable. Like, he's a pretty decent champion. This is the Trinity opportunity build variation. We've seen some others, like Collector second, but Collector looks really bad. 200 more gold on that cost on that item and 2 less lethality has really hurt it. Makes it very hard to, like, carve into in a lot of situations. But yeah, opportunity, great second item on Gangplank. He looks to be a very solid B tier pick, especially if you put the games in. Garen lost a lot of power this patch. He drops all the way from the top of the S tier, close to S plus tier, to the low end of the B tier. Definitely took a big hit from some of the items. Like, he was one of the biggest abusers of Stridebreaker and some of the crit items, which obviously also got quite aggressively nerfed. Dead Man's to get buffed, so he does have some consolation there, but he's still very weak compared to where he was. Fiora lost a bit of power. She drops from below A tier to a B tier. She's still a great counter pick in situations, but if you haven't put the games into this champion, she can be very hard to pilot. Aatrox also drops down from the A tier to the B tier. Once again, lost a lot of power from some of the items he uses being more aggressively nerfed than some of the others. That being like Eclipse, Cleaver, Sundered Sky, Profane Hydra, all these items are very nice on him. All of them have been nerfed quite a bit. Grudge, with the change to it, looks to be a lot more accessible for Aatrox, especially if he is not going down the lethality route. But it's early days, and it'll be interesting to see how like the builds shape up with obviously a lot of the nerfs which he has received through the item system. Gragas stays within my B tier. He's still a great neutralizing lane pick. If you're ahead of the curve, he can do a decent amount of damage. If he's behind the curve, you tend to just use him for his ability to displace champions and his ability to just disrupt games. Teemo went down a bit. I believe I already had him in the B tier, but he's more like a gone from high B tier to a low B tier option, to like a mid to low B tier option. Nashor's got hit pretty heavily, and I believe Liandry also lost a decent amount of power. Liandry, for example, I mean, lost 20 AP on it, while I lost 10, so that's kind of some of the the mismatch between like just how much some items got nerfed, and Teemo definitely lost a bit more power for within those systems. Trundle, I think I had Trundle in my C tier. I can't remember. Like, this champion's so forgotten at this point, but he's now a B tier option. He might have already been a B tier option. He's still very simplistic to play. If you can get a good siege going, his item system's still relatively intact. Obviously, Trinity seems to still be a pretty solid option on a lot of these champions, so he stays within my B tier, or moves up to my B tier. Renekton drops from my A tier to the B tier. Also, pretty big abuser of Eclipse and Cleaver. Both of those items got pretty heavily nerfed. Like, thinking about it, he's lost 30 AD out of his first 2 items, which is a lot of power to lose. Kale was already in my B tier, stays with my B tier. Udyr is going to actually move up to my B tier. He's doing a lot better at the moment. Deadman's got buffed. Fimbulwinter didn't get changed. Liandry did lose a bit of AP, but he was so egregiously skewed on that item already that he's still going it because it is just so good. Watch Unending Despair, though. I have seen some Unending Despair rushes on Udyr, so that is definitely a space to look into, especially if that build really does start picking up. And then 2 other champions here, we have Kled and we have Wukong. So Kled lost a bit of power this patch. Obviously, once again, Eclipse, Profane Hydra, both these items quite heavily nerfed. In Wukong's case, he was going things like Grasp or Conqueror into an Eclipse or Trinity into a Profane Hydra variation. Some of those items did get nerfed. It does look to be that Trinity into Profane is still his main core 2 items, but there is definitely room to be like have some options like moved around there, so he could definitely rise back up in the future. Heimerdinger stays with my A tier. He's still like a low niche A tier pick. He did get hit by the item system nerfs. Obviously, he does use the likes of Liandry, Rylai, Blackfire Torch. All these items can function quite nicely on him. All of them to a degree did get nerfed, but he stays within the A tier. Gnar actually goes up to the A tier. So Gnar really benefiting from Trinity being a lot better at the moment. I've actually been playing some Gnar this split, and he feels really good in the current champion item climate. So definitely in a bit better of a spot. I believe he is one of the most picked and contested champions for high elo competitive play for this patch, not Worlds patch. Obviously, there are differentiators between the two. You can tell what pros have been playing in 14.19, and Gnar looks to be the top of that list. Kennen, doing fine at the moment. He is still a very solid elite skewed A tier pick. The higher up you go, the closer he gets to the S plus tier. I don't think he's quite an S plus pick, but he's still doing really well at the moment. Gwen really benefited from Riftmaker not being very heavily nerfed. So Nashor's into Riftmaker looks to be a very solid 2 item core for her. And then 3rd item, obviously she really aggressively spikes from that. She's a very good A tier pick. Silas, also very good A tier pick. This champion has more recently with the changes he received, really been gaining traction as a good top laner. Don't go Lichbane, it looks to be quite weak on him. Go Roa, and then go like a more Bruiser into AP-centric but build variation, and you should find a lot of success on that. Still probably not blindable, but yeah, definitely in a better spot at the moment. Cassiopeia, still great into matchups where she can really utilize her kiting capability. She's stayed relatively neutral, so yeah, she sits within the A tier for the moment. Set lost a lot of power with Stridebreaker, even though some of the other item changes did help him, like Overlord's Bloodmail, still a very good 3rd item for him, where you're getting like Stride, Hullbreaker, Overlord's Bloodmail, Steric, and then you can like flex 5th slot. But he is down from the S tier. He is now like a mid to low A tier pick. He's definitely not as strong as he was in the previous patch. Jax moves up to my A tier. I think I had him as like a high B tier or like a low A tier pick in my previous tier list. He now sits as a very solid mid pick A tier champion. Yeah, he's really benefiting from some of the champions which have gone up, combined with less damage in the game, more cycles of Counter-Strike, which is a very powerful ability for him, and being able to utilize Trinity, which didn't get hit as hard as some of the other options. Also, very good for Jax. So Jax, very deserving of an A tier spot. Poppy, doing really well at the moment. A great answer to heavy mobility champions, very reliant on gap closing onto you to output their damage. She can really nullify a lot of matchups, combined with her really high base damage and her, Fimbulwinter not being nerfed. She's in a really good spot at the moment. Very high A tier pick in her current state. Ryze. Well, Ryze was my underrated pick. People have definitely started catching on though. This champion has been on the rise for a while. He's definitely doing a lot better at the moment, not only through his buffs, but through not being as heavily hit by the item system. So yeah, you're still looking at Seraphs or Roa Rush into different AP like variations, and yeah, he's in a really good spot at the moment. Urgot down from the S tier to the A tier. I've played a couple games of Urgot this split. I think actually no, I might have only played the one game of Urgot. I was testing like different build variations. We've had like, I mean, Strikebreaker being nerfed really hurts that variation. You're not really, but the thing is, okay, so Strikebreaker Urgot is nerfed, which was one of his ways of like compensating for the amount of movement speed in the game. Movement speed in the game is overall down, so Urgot doesn't really need to go Strikebreaker anywhere near as much as he once did. Hullbreaker looks to be in a pretty like similar spot to where it was. It's kind of niche, but definitely a bit more accessible. Cleaver obviously lost 20 AD, which is a pretty big nerf to Urgot, so you're not as dependent on Cleaver, especially if you're not playing into tank matchups. If you are, then Cleaver is still a very good option there. Overall, though, he's a slight bit powered down, but he's still a very good champion. It's something I will still recommend for the lower ranks, especially if you're looking to maybe just one trick or like really engage with one pick in particular. Sion moves up. He's been progressively moving up over like the last two splits, whether that's through buffs, the item system slowly getting better for him. Titanic Hydra is what I really like as a rush option on him currently. It really makes up for his lack of consistent damage. If you're not able to consistently land Qs, then like Sion really doesn't have a huge amount of damage within his kit outside of like W, and then relying on his auto attacks. If you go things like Overlord's Bloodmail, Stark, Titanic Hydra, it really makes up for some of those downfalls, and Sion is in a really good spot again, so really something I would recommend picking up. Cho'Gath has also been on the rise for a while. Tank system got nerfed less than a lot of the other systems, thus he jumps up to a high A tier pick. Malphite also really benefiting from tank system being buffed. He also jumps up to a higher A tier pick. Ornn, akin to the last three champions, also really benefiting from the tank system being buffed. There are situations where I believe Fimbulwinter should start being purchased with the nerfs as one of the other options. It definitely looks to be something which has been creeping up for a while. Thornmail also has less health, which can hurt in situations. Sunfire also not as aggressively scaling as it once did, but the flat burn ticks also are slightly better early on, so picking up on early barmies can still feel quite nice. Heartsteel is the main thing here though, especially for like Sion and Cho'Gath. That item hardly got touched, and if you can get stacks on that, it can be really hard for a lot of picks to like break you and kill you within the game, so definitely be aware of that. If enemy team does not have good has bad champions for maximum health damage, then these two picks can be really oppressive in those situations, so really watch Sion and Cho'Gath in those spots. And then the other two picks in my A tier, we have Alawi and we have Warwick. In Alawi's case, she stays relatively neutral. Iceborne Gauntlet got a bit adjusted, and it stays as a relatively solid first item for her. She does lose a bit of power with the likes of Cleaver and Sterix being nerfed quite heavily, but she's still a very solid A tier pick. Warwick stays relatively neutral to where he was. He's obviously a bit more niche, and if you don't play a lot of Warwick, it can be quite hard to kind of play this champion, as he's very different to a lot of the other top laners, being more reliant on his like utilizing his passive really effectively on the wave, and a bit more wave management combined with really deceptive all-in timers, which can be a knowledge check for the opponent more than anything, but Warwick really benefiting from the not so much the systems, but like the kind of state of the game at the moment. The S tier. Okay, so there's a lot of champions which have shifted around here, but a lot of them are actually relatively similar to what they once were. Singed is in a great spot at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if he was nerfed going into 14.20. His win rate is absurd at its current rate. Obviously, he's very niche compared to a lot of the other picks within my S tier, which obviously does inflate his win rate to a degree, but the item system stayed relatively neutral for him. Like Rylai, Riftmaker, both these items still very nice options on Singed. So yeah, very deserving of an S tier spot. Camille is the best AD elite skewed pick I would recommend at the moment. Kennen's probably the best AP elite SKU pick, but there's more room open within those spaces, so that's something to be a bit more aware of. But Camille looks to be queen of the top lane, especially the higher up you go, so if you want to sink a lot of time into Camille at the moment, really doing quite well with the lack of nerf towards Trinity Force. Obviously it did get nerfed, it lost a bit of attack speed, bit of AD, and then gained a bit through the health, but yeah, she's doing really well at the moment, a great S tier pick. Tahm Kench, I think this champion is unholy broken in his current state. This would be the Heartsteel, Riftmaker, Protobelt trio of items. they were nerfed a very little amount compared to some of the other options. I've been saying it for a while, but Tahm Kench is absurdly broken on this trio of items, especially in low elo. It does get a bit harder to play when you go like Masters higher. Then you can make the argument that it's not broken once you get into those like elo ranges. But as like a low elo pick, play Heartsteel, Riftmaker, Heartsteel, Riftmaker, Protobelt, Tahm. It's probably the easiest, well, I mean, one of the easiest things to climb with, especially in the lower ranks. Just one trick that, and you should get to Diamond in no time. Volibear stays relatively neutral. Riftmaker also looks to be, once again, a really solid pickup on this champion, so definitely be aware of that. Shen, I know a lot of Shen mains have been talking about just how powerful this pick is, and he is in a very powerful spot. The map utility he has, combined with the item system being very similar to what it once was. Titanic Hydra looks to be a great item on this pick as well, combined with the likes of Heartsteel, which is also still a very solid item on Shen. He's a great S tier pick as well. Zac has lost a lot of his popularity, but really benefiting from larger health pools. Obviously, he does a lot of maximum health damage on his W. That combined with the tank system being relatively similar to what it once was, Zac is in a great spot as well. Yorick also within my S tier. So Yorick's been under the radar strong for a while. I know some people have kind of caught on, but he's still very unpopular. And honestly, with just how popular he is, you're probably fine for just playing this pick and not really expecting nerfs. I will say this and he'll get nerfed in 14.20, but anyway, Yorick really, really benefiting from Trinity Force at the moment into like a Hull Breaker, Bruiser variation. He's in a great spot in his current state, and yeah, very deserving of an S tier spot. He does obviously end up being a bit more low elo skewed in his current state though, so do be aware of that. Kind of akin to Tahm Kench, he will begin to fall off once you go like Diamond 2 higher. And then 3 more picks here. So Mundo in a great spot. He was obviously nerfed quite heavily with Warmogs being very potent on him, and when that item did get nerfed, he did drop down to like a low A tier pick. But Heartsteel into like some of the like there are different tank variations you can go. You can go like Heartsteel Spirit, Heartsteel Unending Despair. We've seen some Heartsteel Form Mails. There's like there's different things which can really work on this pick, but overall Heartsteel Rush just looks to be the way to go, and he's really benefiting from that item being hardly nerfed, so he deserves a very good S tier spot. Nasus jumps back up to the S tier. I demoted him down to the A tier with the nerfs in 14.18, but with Trinity and Iceborne both looking like very viable first slot options on this champion, he once again goes back up to the S tier. And then Mordekaiser is my premier pick of the patch. He is, I mean, he's absurdly strong. He is the best stat stick in his current state, combined with the item system being once again relatively neutral for him. He's obviously benefiting from it being early split, where the games are a bit more volatile, and being someone who can obviously opt into a decent amount of health. You can, I mean, tanks just traditionally tend to be a bit better on early split, so some of the tank picks could probably drop down later on when we go into this split. But yeah, at the moment though, Mord benefiting from the meta, like tanks being a lot more popular. Mord is a great answer to those. He's a great anti-tank option, combined with his item system being relatively neutral, and then the fact that he was already in a pretty good spot in 14.18. He's my premier pick. I think this champion is the best thing to play in like low to mid elo, and he should get you to masters, especially if you just one trick him for the early split. Those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. Obviously the meta is very volatile at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see how things shape up and how Riot balances the game going into 14.20. But if you stick to the S tier picks at the moment, and then some of the A tier, I think some of the low A tier is a bit more a bit more like high elo but like skewed, so maybe not the full A tier list. Like some of these you do have to put a bit more time in to really be rewarded. But like, yeah, the S plus S tier, stick to these champions, and you should definitely find success within solo queue at the moment. And yeah, have a good first patch. Have a good first patch of the split. I'm failing at words, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.